Marco, Polo, Marco, Polo, Marco, Polo!
Oh, I was here the whole time. Yeah, I know I did that bit last time, but I promised you a part two of Marco Polo's adventures in China. And I got three more stories that he wrote just to tell us what it was like back then in the 13th century. So, the first one we're going to read, thanks for showing up, is how the Khan sent his messages. Kublai Khan had a very interesting courier system, and let's see what they have to say about it. Now then, now you must know that from this city of Cambaluc, which is Peking, proceed many roads and highways, leading to a variety of provinces, one to one province, another to another, and each road receives the name of the province to which it leads, and it is a very sensible plan. And the messengers of the emperor in travelling from Cambaluc, be the road whichsoever they will, find at every 25 miles of the journey a station which they call Yamb, or we should say the horse post house. And at each of those stations used by the messengers, there is a large and handsome building for them to put up at, in which they find all the rooms furnished with fine beds and other necessary articles in rich silk, and where they are provided with everything they could want. If even a king were to arrive at one of these, he would find himself well lodged. Hotels along the way, gas stations maybe. It kind of sounds like that, doesn't it? At some of these stations, moreover, there shall be posted some 400 horses, standing ready for the use of the messengers. At others there shall be 200, according to the requirements, and to what the emperor has established in each case. At every 25 miles, as I said, or anyhow at every 30 miles, you find one of these stations on all the principal highways leading to the different provincial governments, and the same is the case throughout all the chief provinces subject to the great Khan. Even when the messengers have to pass through a roadless tract where neither house nor hostel exist, still there are the station houses that have been established just the same, excepting that the intervals are somewhat greater and the day's journey is fixed at 35 to 45 miles instead of 25 to 30. But they are provided with horses and all the other necessaries, just like those we have described, so that the emperor's messengers, come they from what region they may find everything ready for him. And in sooth, this is a thing done on the greatest scale of magnificence that was ever seen. Never had emperor, king, or lord such wealth as this manifests. For it is a fact that on all of these posts taken together, there are more than 300,000 horses kept up, specially for the use of the messengers. And the great buildings that I have mentioned are more than 10,000 in number, all richly furnished, as I told you. The thing is on a scale so wonderful and costly that it is hard to bring oneself to describe it. But now, I will tell you another thing that I had forgotten, but which ought to be told whilst I'm on this subject. You must know that by the great Khan's orders, there has been established between those post houses, at every interval of 3 miles, a little fort with some 40 houses round about it, in which dwell the people who act as the emperor's foot runners. Every one of those runners wears a great wide belt set all over with bells, so that as they run the 3 miles from post to post, their bells are heard jingling a long way off. And thus on reaching the post, the runner finds another man similarly equipped, and all ready to take his place, who instantly takes over whatsoever he has in charge, and with it receives a slip of paper from the clerk, who is always at hand for the purpose. And so the new man sets off and runs his 3 miles. And in this way, the emperor, who has an immense number of these runners, receives dispatches with news from places 10 days' journey off in 1 day and night, or, if need be, news from 100 days off in 10 days and nights, and that is no small matter. In fact, the fruit season, many a time fruit shall be gathered one morning in Cambaluc, and in the evening of the next day it shall reach the great Khan at Kandu, a distance of 10 days' journey. That used to be a very, very big thing. Even now, like, we kind of appreciate the bananas we get from South America and such, but like without the technologies we have today, that would have been very difficult. The The clerk at each of these posts notes the time of each courier's arrival and departure, and there are often other officers whose business it is to make monthly visitations of all the posts and to punish those runners who have been slack in their work. The emperor exempts these men from all tribute and pays them besides, so no taxes and a salary, not bad, very honorable. Moreover, there are also at those stations other men equipped similarly with girdles hung with bells, who are employed for expresses when there is a call for great haste in sending dispatches to any governor of a province, or to give news when any baron has revolted, or any other such emergencies. And these men travel a good 200 or 250 miles in the day, and much more in the night. I'll tell you how it stands. They take a horse from those at the station, which are standing ready saddled, all fresh and in wind, and mount and go full speed, as hard as they can ride, in fact. And when those at the next post hear the bells, they get ready another horse, and a man equipped in the same way, and he takes over the letter or whatever it may be, and he's off in full speed to the third station, where again a fresh horse is found already, so the dispatch speeds along from post to post, always at full gallop, with regular change of horses. And the speed at which they go is marvelous. By night, however, they cannot go so fast as by day, because they have to be accompanied by footmen with torches, who cannot keep up with them at full speed. But these men, they are highly prized, and they could never do it if they didn't bind hard the stomach, chest, and head with strong bands. And each of them carries with him a gerfalcon tablet, in sign that he is bound on an urgent express, so that if perchance his horse break down, it's funny to think of a horse breaking down, but I guess that means a totally different thing, or he meet with other mishap, whomsoever he may fall in with the road, he is empowered to make dismount and give up his horse. Nobody dares refuse in such a case, so that the courier always hath a fresh good nag to carry him. So now, all these numbers of post horses cost the emperor nothing at all, and I'll tell you how and why. Every city or village or hamlet that stands near one of these post stations has a fixed demand made on it for as many horses as it can supply, and these it must furnish to the post. And in this way are provided all the posts of the cities, as well as the towns and the villages round about them. Only in uninhabited tracts the horses are furnished at the expense of the emperor himself. Nor do the cities maintain the full number, say, of 400 horses, always at their station, but month by month 200 shall be kept at the station, and the other 200 at grass, coming into their turn to relieve the first 200. And if there chance to be some river or lake to be passed by the runners and horse posts, the neighboring cities are bound to keep 3 or 4 boats in constant readiness for the purpose. So that's an interesting way to do things. I guess we do it kind of similar now, but it's pretty clever for its time, and it would have cost a whole lot of money. Even Marco Polo was pretty amazed by this, and he was from Italy. Here in the book, there's a little poem written by one such person who had this job. He was a messenger, and his name was Shuang Zhu, and this was written in the 4th century BC. So let's read it. It's very short. Brilliant bright the blossoms glow on the level heights and the marshlands low. The royal messenger am I. At the king's command I can swiftly fly. Equipped with all that man may need, alert, determined to succeed. 3 teams of horses, young and strong, I have to whirl my car along. My steeds are white, or grey, or pied, well skilled am I each team to guide. We gallop till the sweat flakes stain, with large wet spots each glossy rein. Each man I meet without delay must tell me all he has to say. The realm I traverse till I bring the counsel sought for by the king. That's very nice. Gives you a little insight in what it was like to have that job in that time. He seems very proud of his job. He considers his job very important. So Marco Polo actually helped Genghis Khan, or actually Kublai Khan, capture a city. And he wrote about it here, how he taught the Khan how to capture a city. Let's read about it. So now you must know that this city, Saianfu, held out against the great Khan for 3 years after the rest of the Mansi, southern China, had surrendered. The great Khan's troops made incessant attempts to take it, but they could not succeed because of the great and deep waters that were round about it. so that they could only approach from one side only, which was the north. And I tell you, they never would have taken it, but for a circumstance that I am going to relate. You must know that when the great Khan's host had lain 3 years before the city without being able to take it, they were greatly chafed thereat. Then Messer, I guess that's Messer Niccolo Polo and Mr. Mafio and Mr. Marco said, "We could find you a way of forcing the city to surrender speedily." Whereupon those of the army replied that they should be right glad to know how that should be. So all this talk took place in the presence of the great Khan, for messengers had been dispatched from the camp to tell him that there was no taking the city by blockade, for it continually received supplies of victuals from those sides which they were unable to invest, and the great Khan had sent back word that take it they must, and find a way how. Then spoke up the two brothers and Messer Marco the son, and said, "Great prince, we have among us our followers, men who are able to construct mangonels, which shall be able to cast such great stones that the garrison will never be able to stand them, but will surrender incontinently as soon as the mangonels or trebuchets shall have shot into the town." A trebuchet, and a war engine, giving the Chinese war engines. The Khan bade them with all his heart to have such mangonels made as speedily as possible. Now Mr. Niccolo and his brother and his son immediately caused timber to be brought, and as much as they desired, and fit for the work in hand. And they had two men among their followers, a German and a Nestorian Christian, who were masters of that business. And these they directed to construct 2 or 3 mangonels capable of casting stones of 300 pounds weight. Accordingly, they made 3 fine mangonels, each of which cast stones of 300 pounds weight and more. And when they were complete and ready for use, the emperor and the others were greatly pleased to see them, and caused several stones to be shot in their presence, whereat they marveled greatly, and greatly praised the work. And the Khan ordered that the engines should be carried to his army, which was at the leaguer of Saianfu. And when the engines were got to the camp, they were forthwith set up, and to the great admiration of the Tartars. And what should I tell you? When the engines were set up and put in gear, a stone was shot from each of them into town. These took effect among the buildings, crashing and smashing through everything with a huge din and commotion. And when the townspeople witnessed this new and strange visitation, they were so astonished and dismayed that they knew not what to do or say. They took counsel together, but no counsel could be suggested how to escape from these engines, for the thing seemed to them to be done by sorcery. They declared that they were all dead men if they yielded not, so they determined to surrender on such conditions as they could get. Wherefore they straightway sent word to the commander of the army that they were ready to surrender on the same terms as the other cities in the provinces had done, and to become the subjects of the great Khan, and to this the captain of the host consented. He let them surrender. So the men of the city surrendered, and were received to terms, and this all came about through the exertions of Mr. Niccolo and Mr. Mafio and Mr. Marco, and it was no small matter. For this city and province is one of the best that the great Khan possesses, and brings him in great revenues. This kind of reminds me of stories that I've heard about Merlin. Apparently Merlin, at least some of the stories told about him, was made into a magician because he just happened to have technology that they didn't have at the time, and he shared it with them. So it's a very familiar story that I think I seem to have heard before. It's amazing how history tends to repeat itself, or somebody tells a story of the past and kind of makes it, fit a certain other thing. We see this here. So one more story to read by Marco Polo. He went into a Chinese city named Hangzhou, and he wrote all about what he saw. And let's see how he describes it. So, a Chinese city at the end of the 13th century by Marco Polo. When you have left the city of Chang'an and have traveled for 3 days through a splendid country, passing a number of towns and villages, you arrive at the most noble city of Kinsei, Hangzhou, the name of which is too much to say in our tongue, the City of Heaven. That sounds very nice. And since we have got thither, I will enter into particulars about its magnificence, and these are well worth the telling, for the city is beyond dispute the finest and the noblest in the world. In this we shall speak according to the written statement which the queen of this realm sent to Bayan, the conqueror of the country, for transmission to the great Khan, in order that he might be aware of the surpassing grandeur of the city and might be moved to save it from destruction or injury. I will tell you all the truth as it was set down in that document, for truth it was, as the said Mr. Marco Polo at a later date was able to witness this with his own eyes. And now we shall rehearse those particulars. First and foremost, then, the document stated that the city of Kinsay to be so great that it hath 100 miles of compass, and there are in it 12,000 bridges of stone, and for the most part so lofty that a great fleet could pass beneath them. And let no man marvel that there are so many bridges, for you see the whole city stands as if it were in the water and surrounded by water, so that a great many bridges are required to give free passage about it. And though the bridges be so high, the approaches are so well contrived that carts and horses do cross them. The document aforesaid also went on to state that there in the city were 12 guilds of the different crafts, and that each guild had 12,000 houses in the occupation of its workmen. Each of these houses contains at least 12 men, whilst some contain 20 and some 40. Not that all these are masters, but inclusive of the journeymen who work under the masters. And yet all these craftsmen had full occupation, for many other cities of the kingdom are supplied from this city with what they require. The document aforesaid also stated that the number and wealth of the merchants, and also the amount of goods that passed through their hand, was so enormous that no man could form a just estimate thereof. And I should have told you, with regard to those masters of the different crafts who are at the head of such houses, as I have mentioned, that neither they nor their wives ever touch a piece of work with their own hands, but live as nicely and delicately as if they were kings and queens. The wives, indeed, are most dainty and angelic creatures. Moreover, it was an ordinance laid down by the king that every man should follow his father's business and no other, no matter if he possessed 100,000 bezants. I guess that's a weight of money, of gold, I think. Inside the city, there is a lake which has a compass of some 30 miles, and all around it are erected beautiful palaces and mansions of the richest and most exquisite structure that you can imagine, belonging to the nobles of the city. There are also on its shores many abbeys and churches of the idolaters. Idolater, a strong word. In the middle of the lake are 2 islands, on each of which stands a rich, beautiful, and spacious edifice, furnished in such style as to seem fit for the palace of an emperor. And when any of the citizens desired to hold a marriage feast or to give any other entertainment, it used to be done at one of those palaces. And everything would be found there ready to order, such as silver plate, trenchers, dishes, napkins, tablecloths, and whatever else was needful. The king made this provision for the gratification of his people, and the place was open to everyone who desired to give an entertainment. Sometimes there would be at these palaces 100 different parties, some holding a banquet, others celebrating a wedding, yet all would find good accommodation in the different apartments and pavilions, and that in so well ordered a manner that one party was never in the way of another. The houses of the city are provided with lofty towers of stone, in which articles of value are stored for fear of fire, for most of the houses themselves are of timber, and fires are very frequent in the city. The people are idolaters. Since they were conquered by the Great Khan, they use paper money. I guess idolaters are anyone who uses an image or worships it as a god. I guess the ancient Greeks used to do that in their old temples, like Athena, Zeus. They had statues of those gods that they actually treated as the god. They brought food to it to eat it and everything, and they treated them as though they were alive somehow. So that's what I guess idolater is. There's different ways that goes, but anyhow, both men and women were fair and comely, and for the most part clothed themselves in silk. So vast is the supply of that material, both from the whole district of Kinsay and from the imports by traders from other provinces. And you must know that they eat every kind of flesh, even that of dogs and other unclean beasts which nothing would induce a Christian to eat. Since the great Khan occupied the city, he has ordained that each of the 12,000 bridges should be provided with a guard of 10 men, in case of any disturbance, or of any being so rash as to plot treason or insurrection against him. Each guard is provided with a hollow instrument of wood and with a metal basin, and with a timekeeper to enable them to know the hour of the day or night. And so, when 1 hour of the night is past, the sentry strikes on the wooden instrument and on the basin, so that the whole quarter of the city is made aware that 1 hour of the night is gone. At the second hour, he gives 2 strokes, and so on, keeping always wide awake and on the lookout. In the morning, again from the sunrise, they begin to count anew, and strike 1 hour as they did in the night, and so on hour after hour. Part of the watch patrols the quarter to see if any light or fire is burning after the lawful hours, and if they find any, they mark the door, and in the morning the owner is summoned before the magistrates, and unless he can plead a good excuse, he is punished. Also, if they find anyone going about the streets at unlawful hours, they arrest him, and in the morning they bring him before the magistrates. Likewise, if in the daytime they find any poor cripple unable to work for his livelihood, they take him to one of the hospitals, of which there are many, founded by the ancient kings and endowed with great revenues. Or, if he be capable of work, they oblige him to take up some trade. If they see that any house has caught fire, they immediately beat upon that wooden instrument to give the alarm, and this brings together the watchmen from the other bridges to help to extinguish it, and to save the goods of the merchants or others, either by removing them to the towers above mentioned, or by putting them in boats and transporting them to the islands in the lake. For no citizen dares to leave his house at night or to come near the fire, only those who own the property and those watchmen who flock to help, of whom there should come at least 1 or 2,000 at the least. Moreover, within the city there is an eminence on which stands a tower, and on top of the tower is hung a slab of wood. Whenever fire or any other alarm breaks out in the city, a man who stands there with a mallet in his hand beats upon the slab, making a noise that is heard to a great distance. So when the blows upon this slab are heard, everyone is aware that fire is broken out or there's some cause for alarm. All the streets of the city are paved with stone or brick, as indeed are all the highways throughout Manzi. So, that's southern China, so that you ride and travel in every direction without inconvenience. Were it not for this pavement, you could not do so, for the country is very low and flat, and after rain it is deep in mire and water. But as the great Khan's couriers could not gallop their horses over the pavement, the side of the road is left unpaved for their convenience. The pavement of the main street of the city is laid out in 2 parallel ways of 10 paces in width on either side, leaving a space in the middle laid with fine gravel, under which are vaulted drains which convey the rainwater into the canals, and thus the road is kept ever dry. It's pretty smart. You must know that also in the city of Kinsei also has some 3,000 baths, the water of which is supplied by springs. They are hot baths, and the people take great delight in them, frequenting them several times a month, for they are very cleanly in their persons. They are the finest and largest baths in the world, large enough for 100 persons to bathe together. When anyone dies, the friends and relations make a great mourning for the deceased, and clothe themselves in hempen garments, and follow the corpse, playing on a variety of instruments and singing hymns to their idols. And when they come to the burning place, they take representations of things cut out of parchment, such as caparisoned horses, male and female slaves, camels, armor, suits of cloth and of gold, and money in great quantities, and these things they put on the fire along with the corpse, so that they are all burnt up with it. And they tell you that the dead man shall have all these slaves and animals of which the effigies are burnt, alive in flesh and blood, and the money and gold at his disposal in the next world, and that the instruments which they have caused to be played at his funeral, and the idle hymns that they have chanted, shall also be produced again to welcome him in the next world, and that the idols themselves will come to do him honor. So yeah, that's I guess what they believed back then. If you made representations out of paper and you burned them with them, then that stuff actually went with him. So I don't know what you believe, but anyhow. Furthermore, there exists in this city the palace of the king who fled, him who was emperor of Manzi, and that is the greatest palace in the world, as I shall tell you more particularly. For you must know its demesne has a compass of 10 miles, all enclosed with lofty, battlemented walls, and inside the walls are the finest and most delectable gardens upon earth, filled with fine fruits. There are numerous fountains in it also, and lakes full of fish. In the middle is the palace itself, a great and splendid building. It contains 20 great and handsome halls, one of which is more spacious than the rest and affords room for a vast multitude to dine. It is all painted in gold, with many histories and representations of beasts and birds, of knights and dames, and many other marvelous things. It forms a really magnificent spectacle, for all over the walls and all over the ceiling you see nothing but paintings in gold. And besides these halls, the palace contains 1,000 large and handsome chambers, all painted in gold, and divers colors. There's one church only, belonging to the Nestorian Christians. And there is another thing I must tell you. It is the custom for every burgess of this city, and in fact for every description of person in it, to write over his door his own name, the name of his wife and those of his children, his slaves, and all the inmates of his house, and also the number of animals that he keeps. And if anyone dies in the house, then the name of that person is erased. And if any child is born, that name is added. So in this way, the sovereign is able to know exactly the population of the city. And this is the practice also throughout all Mansi and Cathay, all South and North China. And I must tell you that every hosteler that keeps a hostel for travelers is bound to register their names and surnames, as well as the day and month of their arrival and departure. And thus the sovereign hath the means of knowing, whenever it pleases him, who come and go throughout his dominions. And veritably, this is a wise order and provident. So I guess Marco Polo was learning just as much from the cons too. It's just it's interesting what happens when humanity kind of puts their heads together. Wish it didn't always have to end in war, but whatever it is that men put their heads to, if we do it together and we put aside things like nationalism and culture, and don't always think we're the best, but realize that we can learn something from someone else, the world becomes a better place. Everything becomes smaller and more compact, and we seem to, come up with ideas and technologies that just seem to work and last the test of time and aren't just for money and power. But anyhow, thank you very much for sitting here and listening to me read a story. Uh, I hope you come back next time. I'll have a lot more stories to read from this anthology, A History of the World in Story, Song, and Art. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.